Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Over the past years I've covered every major story in the Elder Scrolls Legends game. The main story, the Dark Brotherhood, the Clockwork City. And now only one main story remains. The story where for the first time since Oblivion we return to the Shivering Isles. So, let's cover the story of the Dunmer Talym Rend, who traveled to the Shivering Isles. And let's talk about what he found and why he went there. So, the story I will tell you today is the story of Talym Rend, a Dunmer who, for reasons we'll cover up shortly, ends up in the Shivering Isles. Talym is an old Dunmer, once a spy in service of the Empire, likely a part of the Blades as he lived in Morrowind at the time. As a side note, this means that this story likely plays somewhere before the Oblivion crisis in the Third Era, when the Blades were still powerful and served the Empire, and before the hero of Kvatch, the hero from the Oblivion game, went into the Shivering Isles in the DLC. Now, for some reason, the wikis both categorize this story as setting place in the Fourth Era. I don't really get that, since the story itself takes place in the Third Era, at least as far as I can tell. But the narrator who narrates the story in the Elder Scrolls Legends likely is in the Fourth Era, so a bit of a grey area there, but this story likely plays in the Third Era. But take that with a grain of salt as other people think otherwise, but yeah. Anyway, the specifics of his spy involvement and the time and place don't really matter, as Talym left behind his life as a spy at some point when his son Novos was stricken with some illness of the mind, which he calls a terrible madness. He travelled all across of Morrowind and sought help from all that he could think of, from the temple to Ashlanders to even some Outlander healers. But none could heal Novos's mind, and every day Talym got more desperate, so eventually he started looking into the taboo and forbidden practices of Morrowind, to see whether there was a cure to be found for his son's madness, some forbidden knowledge which could perhaps help him. This is where our story picks up, as he sets out to make a bargain with Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, and to do so he travelled to the Shivering Isles in order to seek out the Daedric Prince of Madness personally. Upon entering the Shivering Isles, the realm of Sheogorath, he is stopped by a Bosmer thief named Surreal, who tells him that he can't travel to the palace of Sheogorath as there's a gatekeeper which he needs to pass first, which can only be defeated by a weapon from the Garden of Swords. So Talym travels to the Garden of Swords to find a weapon which can defeat the gatekeeper. He then manages to defeat the gatekeeper, and upon entering New Sheoth Palace he encounters Haskell, Sheogorath's aide and chamberlain, who tells Talym that Sheogorath thinks that he is too boring to even have a conversation with, so he needs to go and prove himself to be amusing in the Shivering Isles, so that Sheogorath will talk to him. Talym is obviously annoyed, but he leaves the palace in order to prove that he's amusing, and he does so by helping out several people in the Shivering Isles, curing them of their madness or helping them with their problems. Two of whom are the Bosmer thief Surreal, who he encountered at the beginning and, as he discovered, ran off with his money, and the other one is an orcish bard named Lusra Groshar, who has a certain tune in her head which she can't repeat, but it's still stuck in her head, but she can't repeat it because some creatures named Gemites are actually keeping the notes away from her, which are some creatures from Sheogorath. Now, helping out these people all entertain Sheogorath to no end, and he's now happy to see Talym. But once Talym asks him to make his son sane again, Sheogorath has this to say.
You want me to do what? I'm the Daedric Prince of Madness. I don't make people sane. I'd have to be crazy to do that. And I am crazy, so I'll do it. But here's the bargain, mortal. You want me to make one person sane? You've got to bring 3 people around to my side of the coin. You understand? 3 lovely broken minds for one boring whole one. Oh, that's fair, isn't it? Given that you're desperate, and I'm mean. You have a deal.
So, Talym sets off to make 3 people mad, but fortunately Talym didn't have to make all those people mad on his own, as the people that Sheogorath chose to be turned over would not be easily swayed to madness, so Sheogorath assembled a team of ragtag good-doers for Talym, consisting of Surreal, the thief who robbed him earlier, and the orcish bard, both being threatened by him that he would dismember them if they didn't help him. Anyway, 3 people to turn to madness for Sheogorath, and the first one is a Khajiit named Zanar, a former assassin which Talym and his band of allies turn over to madness by having him haunted by the people that he'd killed in the past. The next victim is called Baron Navir, a spoiled man who's never wanted for anything and thus became greedy. In order to turn him to madness, Talym played on his ego, making him believe that he has mystical powers. He does this by making the Baron believe some nonsense that he just made up came true, like his Kwama eggs laying golden eggs and having it snow in the summer. He then believes he is the Prince of Prophecy and decides to go and fly off a cliff. Needless to say, he can't fly, because the only reason he had powers is because Talym and his band of good doers, yeah, they turned the eggs gold and they made it snow, so the Baron didn't have any powers and thus falls to his death, which, ironically, of course, amuses Sheogorath. Now, someone who isn't amused is the bard Luzra, who decides to leave Talym and his quest because she thinks that they are going too far, rather be dismembered than having to actually kill people for Sheogorath. Now, the last victim that Sheogorath chose was, in my opinion, the most interesting one, Imperial Spy Master Portia Loren, Talym's old boss from when he worked for the Blades. Talym obviously doesn't want her to turn to madness, as he knows that she's a good person, which is obviously Sheogorath's aim, but Talym decides not to doubt himself and his quest, pressing on and deciding that in order to cure his son, even a good person could be sacrificed. So he and his remaining crew members, Surreal, seek out Spymaster Portia, who's busy collecting intelligence on the Reachmen, who are plotting something sinister according to the intelligence that they had gathered. Now, Talym decides that in order to drive Portia to madness, he needs to plant some false evidence which may lead to her entire unit to die out, making Portia feel that she failed and thus driving her to insanity. Surreal is disgusted by this plan and, like Luzra, she leaves Talym, leaving him alone to complete the job for Sheogorath and alone to save his son. Talym goes through with the plan, and his plan succeeds, and by coverting letting Portia believe that he found some sort of cure to her Reachman poison, he has her sending her men into death. And it wasn't just her men that died, also a lot of innocent bystanders in the form of priests. This drove Portia ridden with grief and turned her into madness for Lord Sheogorath. So, 3 souls down, 1 left to cure. So Talym traveled home to find his mad son and bring him to Sheogorath, but when he comes home he finds his house empty. Shocked, he turns to a neighbor who is confused and asks him what happened to his memory, because she tells him that his son Novos has been dead for more than a year now and that she was the one that helped Talym bury his son. Talym then rages in his anger as he decides that this must be a mind trick by Sheogorath, and in rage he travels back to the Shivering Isles, but as he came closer to the palace at New Sheoth, Talym kept losing more and more of his sanity as he mindlessly murdered all the Daedra who stood in his way to the palace, as Sheogorath refused to see him and released his golden saints upon him. But Talym overcomes the guards, but continues to lose his entire sense of self, ranting to Sheogorath all the way, even killing innocent creatures on a mad rage to find the Prince of Madness. He starts to forget who he is, and for a time he thinks he's Vivek, or perhaps the Baron, or anyone who isn't Talym Rend. He then kills a mudcramp merchant and a gnarl in his madness and in his anger, and he gets lost, terribly lost in the Shivering Isles, until someone finds him, Luzra, the Orcish bard, whom he nearly attacks as first he thinks that she's a Gemite, but upon almost killing her he hears the same tune that he had to use to cure her madness all the way back when he first entered the Shivering Isles, and suddenly a small part of himself returned. Luzra then helps him clear his mind a bit, and together they set out to find out what Sheogorath did to Talym. Then, in order to force the Prince of Madness to actually reveal what was happening, they sought out Dias of Metheria, who most of you will probably remember from Oblivion, as he was once the librarian and chamberlain of Jiggalag, Daedric Prince of Order, and the former shape of Sheogorath. You see, for the people that don't know, the other Daedric princes feared the power of Jiggalag, Daedric Prince of Order, so much that they conspired to transform him into that which he hated most, the essence of chaos itself, Daedric Prince of Madness, Sheogorath. That's kind of the origin story of Sheogorath for those who don't know. So, Dias told Talym to find the Sword of Jiggalag, an artifact which Talym would be able to use to bring the memories of Order come back to Sheogorath, which Talym could use to force Sheogorath to do his bidding, as Sheogorath, being the essence of chaos, could not stand order, and thus memories of order would drive him mad. Or sane, or whatever you would do to someone who is already so crazy and mad. And thus Talym sets out again for the confrontation with Sheogorath. Together with the Orcish bard, he finds the Sword of Jiggalag and then makes his way back to New Sheoth Palace, where now he can enter. And once there, he speaks to Sheogorath. And the truth is finally revealed. Because Sheogorath tells him that Talym already once came to him, unable to live with the memories of his dead son. He begged the Prince of Madness to take away his memories of his dead son because he couldn't live with him. Sheogorath at the time agreed, but only if Talym turned 3 people to madness. A deal was made, and Talym forgot everything about his son being dead and set out to turn 3 people into madness, but Sheogorath tricked him. Because with some of Sheogorath's influence, suddenly Talym believed himself to be on a mission to cure his son of madness, meaning that in every scenario, if he turned the 3 people to madness, he would once again discover that his son was dead, and Talym would have still grieved for his son. For the Daedric Prince of Madness is a deceiver in all bargains. Then with the power of Jiggelag's sword, Talym forced Sheogorath to restore his original memories, because he'd rather know what happened to his son than live in this eternal unknown. It was revealed that when Talym was still working for the Blades, they had attempted to infiltrate the Worm Cult. Something went awry on the mission, with, depending on the player's choice, Talym either being forced to kill the child himself, or the Worm Cult killing the child. And then this is how the story ends.
Unable to withstand his own terrible memories, Sheogorath relented. He restored my memories and lifted the cloud of madness from my mind. I also made him promise to leave Luzra and Siriel in peace. In exchange, I promised to leave the Isles forever. I return home now to nurse my grief, and perhaps in time, to plot my revenge on the Cult of the Worm. My warning to you then is this. There will always be a devil seeking a bargain, promising to take away your pains. Do not trust them. The past may be the heaviest burden, but it is our burden to bear.
It is a dark tale without a really happy ending, but it's a tale to be told nonetheless, because now I've covered every Elder Scrolls Legends story on this channel. And I have to say, with these kind of stories I'm kinda sad that the game is dead, that Bethesda has given up on it, because I think that this format for storytelling definitely has more potential than this. Anyway, before I end this video, allow me to say I hope that I see you again in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, and allow me to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters: Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polarized Poutine, Athena Iotis, Henry James Locker, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Tsar Mikal, and Mr. Christmas. It is thanks to these people, along with all the others on screen, that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see you all in the next lore video. Bye bye.